This story touched me personally because my mother worked in an office her whole life, and I know how it can be. This isn't just content reviews, but real-life experience. We tell stories like this so that you can learn from them and avoid making the same mistakes. All names, companies, and addresses are fictional and have been changed.
She held up the employee handbook like it was a badge of honor. Did you even read the dress code? Her voice was sharp, smug, slicing through the quiet of the conference hall as dozens of eyes turned toward me. Elise Mallory, board chair's daughter, VP of strategy for all of 6 days, stood under the projector light in front of 74 employees and waved the handbook like it was gospel. "You're out of uniform," she said with a tight little smile. "You're done here." It was supposed to be a quarterly sync, not a scene out of a high school play, but Elise had a flair for dramatics and fashion policing. I didn't move, just looked at her, then glanced down at my black polo, the same one I'd worn every day for the past 11 years. No one had ever said a word before. And frankly, I hadn't expected it to start now. Before we go further, if you've been here before and never hit subscribe, do it now. It helps more than you know. And if this story keeps you hooked, smash that like button too. It really fuels the team to keep bringing these to life. I unclipped my badge. No words, just silence. Walked down the aisle, past people I'd onboarded, trained, protected during outages. They stared down at their shoes. She watched me go like she'd just bagged a trophy. I hit the lobby, already pulling out my phone, about to call the investor rep, because the merger signing was scheduled for that afternoon, and I was the designated continuity lead for the infrastructure handoff. Then I heard it. Ready to sign the merger? I turned, and there he was. Elias Bennett, the man behind the $3.8 billion deal. Navy coat, no tie, casual elegance. He walked toward me with open arms, wrapping me in a half hug before I could say a word. "Actually," I said, voice steady, "she just fired me." He blinked once. "Who did?" I tilted my head back toward the conference room. Elise, over a shirt. His entire face shifted, smile gone, eyes hard. "She did what?" It was the quiet that followed that said everything, the kind of silence where you can almost hear paper contracts unraveling. Because while Elise was handing out dress code citations, she'd just tripped over something far more dangerous. Me. The systems I managed didn't just power Corvus, they held the compliance certifications the merger required. The deal was structured around continuity, and that continuity required one thing above all else: my signature. And right now, that wasn't happening. Elise's first all-staff memo didn't mention strategy or operations. It was about hallway paint. Specifically, a call for aesthetic realignment to harmonize the Corvus brand with the forward-facing vision of our next era. Attached, mood boards, 6 of them. One was literally just beige. I remember staring at it, wondering if this was some kind of initiation joke. It wasn't. Then came the signage updates, potted plant curation, and a memo suggesting that all future internal emails reflect the energy and tone of a confident innovator. A few of the younger hires applauded it. I kept my head down, reviewing the transition modules for the merger instead. I wasn't about to be distracted by wall art, but Elise didn't want quiet engineers. She wanted compliant visuals. She caught me outside the server compliance sink that Thursday, arms folded, fresh lipstick, her phone already out like she was ready to snap a before and after. "You need to start dressing to reflect the brand," she said, tapping her screen. "We're aligning visual expectations across departments." I looked her in the eye. "I'm not client-facing." She tilted her head like she was explaining crayons to a toddler. "That's not the point. You're seen in this building. That's brand exposure." I pulled out the handbook. Yes, I kept a printed copy in my laptop case, mostly because it was full of gaps I'd learned to protect myself with over the years. "There's no dress code for non-client tech leads," I said, pointing to page 17. Her smirk didn't move. "That'll change." I didn't argue. There was no point. I just nodded and walked past her into the sink, but something in the pit of my stomach shifted. Elise wasn't just here to redecorate, she was here to dominate. Everything. Space, tone, power dynamic. Her father's position on the board gave her cover, and the optics of a fresh face during a billion-dollar merger made her look like the new era Corvus wanted to showcase. But optics weren't going to carry this merger across the finish line. I was. The investor group, Crimson Parallel, had been clear in every quarterly checkpoint. Operational continuity was non-negotiable, and continuity meant me. Not because I was a genius, but because every system, the compliance framework, the API access layers, the escrow-triggered licensing protocols, ran through my custodial credentials. It was boring, invisible, but deeply necessary. There were 3 names on the escrow clause. Mine was first. Crimson Parallel had one condition for closing the deal. I stay on post-merger for a minimum of 18 months to stabilize the system handover. Their board didn't trust AI-led onboarding. They wanted human continuity. And frankly, they didn't care what shirt I wore. But Elise didn't know that. She saw black polos and quiet presence as a threat to her rebranding vision. She thought dominance started with wardrobe changes. What she couldn't see, was that every time she tried to rewrite the visual script of Corvaris, she was bumping against infrastructure she didn't understand. Infrastructure with fail-safes, with backups, with permissions she didn't hold. And in a matter of days, she'd find out exactly how much that mattered. The lights dimmed in the auditorium as the Corvaris logo flickered onto the screen behind Elise. It was our quarterly all-hands, 74 employees in attendance, including the executive team, board observers, and a couple of investor reps sitting quietly near the back. Everyone expected routine updates, KPIs, growth forecasts, maybe another one of Elise's pep talks on brand energy. Instead, she started with a smile. "Before we begin," she said, microphone echoing slightly, "just a quick housekeeping note." Her eyes scanned the crowd but landed squarely on me. One of our leads is out of dress code. A few murmurs, some confused glances. She reached under the podium and held up the employee handbook like it was a court order. Page 17, Visual Compliance Expectations. Then, turning slightly so everyone had a clear view, "You're done here." At first, it was nervous laughter, those awkward chuckles people give when they think they've missed the joke. Then, nothing. No one moved. No one said a word. I didn't either. I walked forward, calm as ever, unclipped my badge, and laid it gently on the podium next to her manicured hand. Her smile faltered for a beat, just enough for me to notice before she looked back at the crowd, as if daring anyone to object. No one did. I turned and walked the center aisle alone. No one met my eyes. Some pretended to check their phones. Others stared straight ahead, frozen. 11 years in this building, and it ended with one sentence, delivered under fluorescent lights and corporate slides. I stepped into the lobby, not angry, not hurt, just still. That's when I heard it. "Ready to sign the merger?" I turned. Elias Bennett, lead investor from Crimson Parallel, stood by the glass entrance holding a slim leather folder. He smiled and walked toward me, arms half open like we were old friends meeting after a long flight. But when he got closer, he paused. His smile faded. "What's wrong?" he asked. I shrugged. "Actually, she just fired me." He blinked. "She who?" I nodded back toward the auditorium. "Elise." He didn't respond right away, just stood there, eyes narrowing as the implications sank in. Then he handed me the folder and stepped around me, heading toward the door I had just exited from. Inside, the lights were still dimmed. The Corvaris logo still hovered on the screen. Elias pushed the door open, and as it clicked shut behind him, I caught the last thing he said before it sealed. "You did what?" I didn't stay to watch her answer, because I didn't need to. The clause Elise had just shattered with a smug grin and a handbook was embedded in every single escrow-triggered document Crimson Parallel had signed. And without my signature, the entire merger, every cent of that $3.8 billion was about to freeze mid-transfer. Over a shirt. The badge she waved off wasn't just access to the server room, it was access to everything. Upstairs, the air had shifted. No more bright talk of brand alignment or energizing the culture. The moment Elias turned and walked into that auditorium, things cracked. Not visibly, not yet. But if you've ever watched legal teams move when they're afraid, you know the signs. First, it was a sudden flurry of calendar blocks. Then came the closed-door huddles. Then the call to HR that came 15 minutes after I left. Legal was the first to panic. Because on page 7 of the investor term sheet, right beneath the sections on equity conversion and lockup periods, was a quiet clause titled Operational Continuity Assurance. And in that clause, it was spelled out in plain legal language. Corvus must maintain existing technical leadership throughout the merger period, specifically named. And I was the only name. Without my signature, the escrow account was locked. It wasn't symbolic, it was literal. Crimson Parallel's legal team had built the structure like a pressure vault. All the valuation, all the vesting triggers, all the convertible payouts, they sat behind my custodial sign-off. So when Elise stripped my badge and tried to call it brand enforcement, she didn't just violate an internal guideline. She triggered what Crimson called a material breach. The IT compliance dashboard lit up within the hour. 3 modules flagged red. The continuity script tied to our infrastructure stability went into flagged audit mode. Systems I'd personally documented, redundancies, vendor integration layers, rollback protocols, went into suspended change status. Meanwhile, Elise tried to get ahead of it. She told PR that I'd walked off in protest over the company's new vision, that I was resistant to culture change, that I had refused to evolve, but I hadn't walked off. She had fired me in front of 74 employees with a microphone, and it was on video. HR sent a brief email that afternoon labeling it an unfortunate misunderstanding. They even floated a line about a potential reinstatement discussion pending internal review. It was vague. Desperate. But Crimson Parallel wasn't vague. They sent a legal memo to our board within 2 hours, 3 bold words at the top: material, breach, notice, and beneath it, a single paragraph outlining the consequences. Pending further review, all escrow-based asset transfers would be halted. The joint venture would be paused, and any deviation from agreed-upon personnel would result in immediate renegotiation of terms, including valuation. Behind closed doors, Elise insisted it could be fixed, that I could be brought back quietly, that maybe they could call it a pause in engagement rather than a termination. But she missed the point entirely. It wasn't about bringing me back. It was about the fact that I had been the infrastructure, not just of systems, but of trust. And that trust had just been publicly shredded. They tried calling twice that night, then emailed, then texted, all from different departments, legal, IT, even someone from executive coordination I'd never heard of before. The tone shifted fast, from cold corporate politeness to barely concealed panic. They needed access, not just to my folders or documentation, but to the entire suite of deployment systems I'd managed over the last 11 years, the ones that had kept Corvus compliant through 3 audits, 2 acquisitions, and 17 regulatory updates, the same systems Elise had dismissed as legacy bloat in her first executive debrief. Turns out, legacy bloat doesn't untangle itself overnight. They assumed it would be simple, just reactivate my badge, log into the server, and override the credentials. But it didn't work like that. I designed the infrastructure around a core principle. Custodial privilege required verified biometric login and tiered key-based protocols with redundancy chains. Not to be paranoid, just to be compliant. We were in fintech infrastructure, not retail. When they tried to brute force entry, the system auto-flagged the breach and triggered a freeze on all high-risk modules. That included the escrow synchronization tool, the compliance reporting dashboard, and the multi-region backup scheduler tied directly to Crimson Parallel's audit team. The logs lit up. Timestamp, 2:41 a.m., flag. Custodial override attempt, response. Access denied. High security lock initiated. Note, custodial authority revoked. Manual. That last line sent the panic into full swing. Because it wasn't just locked. They saw that I had manually revoked my custodial permissions the moment I returned my badge. It had been built into my offboarding script. I never expected to use it, but I had coded it in anyway, just in case someone decided to make a power play before a merger. Elise had assumed firing me would delete the person and preserve the system. She was wrong on both counts. The only way back in required my voice, my print, and the second layer biometric tied to my personal device. Without it, the infrastructure was inert, not broken, just sealed. They tried calling again. The number flashed on my phone as I sat by my window, sipping tea, the city just starting to glow with early morning haze. I didn't answer. The next email was from legal. Subject line, clarification request re custodial access. I didn't open it. Let them sweat. Because when you're dismissed with a smirk and a handbook, you don't race back into the fire to rescue the people who lit the match. You let the structure hold and watch as the ones who thought they ran the building realize they were never holding the keys. Just copies of copies of copies, and every one of them expired the moment they underestimated me. By the third day, the buzz turned to whispers, and the whispers turned into full-on silence when the board convened. They met on the 13th floor. Glass walls, long table, water pitchers untouched. Legal came in first, binder in hand, moving slower than usual, like he already knew where it was heading. I wasn't in the room, but I knew the play-by-play before the hour was out. The floor has vents, and the vents carry voices. He cleared his throat. Clause 9.3d, he said, placing the binder on the table like it was a court exhibit. Merger requires sign-off by original systems custodian. It's a named requirement for escrow release and legal transfer. There was a pause. Someone asked, "And who's that?" Legal didn't flinch. Kara Jameson. Me. The room shifted. Elise, who had been taking notes like she was preparing to run the next big quarterly, looked up fast. "We'll get a waiver," she said, flipping pages in her own binder. "Elias won't let the entire deal fall apart over a name." But that's when someone slid a phone across the table. It was open to a reservation screen. Crimson Parallel had just booked lunch. With me. Elise's hands stopped moving. "Wait," she said, almost laughing. "Why would he talk to her now?" Someone else spoke this time. "Because he's not after Corveris." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "He was never after the company," the voice said, low and steady. "He was after her." That part I hadn't even fully realized myself until Elias said it, when we met that afternoon in a quiet corner booth at Portens, far from the Corveris campus. He didn't even open the menu, just leaned back and said, "We invested in the infrastructure, not the walls around it." I sipped my water and didn't respond. He continued, "You're not just the system's lead, Kara. You are the system. Your architecture, your protocols, your risk forecasting model, it's what gave us the confidence to commit. Elise thought she could fire the plumbing and keep the water flowing, but the pipeline is you." Back in that boardroom, Elise sat frozen, blinking too fast. Her father hadn't said a word. Neither had the other executives. The silence spoke for them. And while they were busy trying to reverse engineer the fallout, Crimson Parallel's legal team had already shifted the language of the deal, from acquisition to pivot, from Corveris to what came next. They hadn't lost the tech. They hadn't lost the systems. They'd only lost Elise. Because when you remove the gatekeeper without knowing what lies behind the gate, you don't just lose access. You lose everything. By the fourth day, the tone of every message changed. The same board members who had watched Elise fire me in silence were now emailing with pleasantries, asking if I had a few moments to connect. Some got creative. "We value your long-term contributions. Would love to chat about a path forward." One even called me an integral piece of our operational DNA, which was ironic, considering they hadn't so much as nodded when I walked out of the auditorium. I ignored most of it. Elise's assistant sent a carefully worded message titled, "Checking in." She offered to coordinate a time for discussion and mentioned Elise was open to re-engagement conversations. They floated a consulting contract. Then a bonus. Then something called a soft return, like they expected me to come slinking back in with my head down, grateful for the chance to clean up the mess they made. But Crimson Parallel had made their offer too, and theirs wasn't a consulting slot. It was a seat at the table, a directorship in the new joint venture, full voting rights, equity, leadership role in the post-merger infrastructure design, unchained from Corveris politics. The merger was still on, but not with the company Elise thought she represented. It was pivoting. Around her. Meanwhile, she was being slowly peeled away from the center. One meeting she wasn't invited to. One decision rerouted around her. Her brand memos stopped circulating. Her plant vendor emails were quietly marked as spam by ops. The silence around her wasn't overt, but it was real. People started whispering. Who fires the merger key holder during signing week? She really thought dress code mattered more than access control. Did no one vet the term sheet? It spread fast. Because in corporate environments, weakness doesn't always come from shouting, it comes from exclusion. You don't get removed, you get ignored, passed over, and slowly erased. The funny thing is, Elise had the handbook. She had titles, her father, the boardroom chair. But what she didn't have was the one thing the investor valued above all else: the keys. Not metaphorical ones, the actual ones, access tokens, custodial clearance, the trust of a team that knew when the system blinked red at 3:12 a.m., I'd be the one answering, not forwarding, not panicking, fixing. Now she couldn't even get the systems team to return her Slack messages. They were routing everything through Crimson, and through me. The final meeting didn't feel like a meeting. It felt like a funeral with coffee. The investor suite on the 26th floor had been prepped for celebration. Catered breakfast, digital signage looping animated merger graphics, and a glossy slide deck that was supposed to reveal the future of Corvaris under Crimson Parallel. But instead of applause, the room was ice. Elise wasn't there, not because she was late, she hadn't been invited. The screen flickered to life at exactly 9 a.m. The first slide read simply, Status, Corvaris deal, rejected. Moving forward with Crimson Parallel, joint venture. No corporate jargon, no euphemisms, just a line drawn in permanent ink. Below the header was a new logo, Crimson Parallel Infrastructure Group. And beneath that, my name, Kara Jameson, co-founder and director of systems integration. The pause that followed was long enough for the screen to time out once. No one moved to stop it. Elise's father, Gerald Mallory, chairman of the board, just sat there, staring at the screen like if he didn't blink, it might change. His hands were clasped tight in front of him, knuckles pale. He opened his mouth once, then closed it. No one filled the silence. Legal finally cleared his throat and said what everyone already knew. We can't reverse it. She fired Ms. Jameson while she was off payroll. There's no clawback. She's not under obligation to re-engage. Another silence. A junior exec, one of the ones who'd chuckled nervously when Elise held up the handbook that day, muttered under his breath, We lost the infrastructure, not the clothes. It cut through the tension like a blade. No one laughed. They all understood now, too late, that this wasn't about a shirt. It never was. It was about the invisible framework they never bothered to learn, never valued until it was gone. The fallback systems, the redundant controls, the way everything held together, not because someone had told it to, but because I had designed it that way. And the person who severed that thread over brand cohesion wasn't even in the building anymore. HR had reassigned Elise to external strategic initiatives, which was their polished way of saying, please stop touching things. There was no announcement. No farewell email. She just faded. Meanwhile, Crimson Parallel's media kit had already gone out. Trade publications were calling it a bold pivot. Some said it was an indictment of corporate ego. Others praised Crimson's agility in choosing people over legacy structure. No one mentioned Elise's name. But my inbox was full. Infrastructure vendors, regulatory agencies, a few ex-Corvaris engineers I hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone wanted to be part of whatever we were building next, and we were building something. The foundation was already laid. Only this time, the gate wasn't just guarded. I was the one drawing the map. 3 weeks after the last board meeting, a small white envelope arrived with no return address. Inside, it was a revised edition of the Corvaris Employee Handbook. New logo on the front. Slightly glossier pages. Tucked between the sections on time-off policies and code of conduct was one freshly updated line, highlighted in yellow. Dress code exemptions may apply to key operational personnel. I laughed. No note, no signature, just that line, glowing like a sheepish postscript to the whole mess. I closed the booklet, untouched beyond that page, and placed it on the corner of my bookshelf, right beside the founding charter for Crimson Parallel Infrastructure Group. One of them represented the system that fired me. The other? The one I built after. The contrast didn't need explanation. Across town, Elise had been quietly reassigned. External Branding Initiatives was the official title, but anyone who spoke fluent corporate knew what that really meant. Parked. Smiled at in meetings, nodded to in hallways, but no longer trusted to touch the machinery. Her father didn't step down, but his voice on the board had softened. The glare he'd given the screen when my name appeared next to co-founder hadn't been followed by a single call. Not one. I didn't gloat, didn't post, didn't leak anything. I never raised my voice, never sent a memo. I just walked. And in walking, I took everything that mattered with me. They still wear their matching uniforms now. Blazers, color-coordinated lanyards, the full Elise-era aesthetic. The walls are beige. The mood boards hang framed in the hallways. The brand is aligned. But the systems? The systems don't run through Corvaris anymore. And the only handbook that matters now, the one I helped write, the one Crimson operates by, has no dress code. Just deliverables, architecture, and uptime. I poured coffee, watched the sun crawl across my desk. The old handbook remained closed. The new chapter had already begun.